This miniature was made with real lead by a child for fun. It's older than the founders of Games Workshop. Heck, it's almost as old as war games themselves. Let me tell you the story of Buck Rogers, his dangerous toy line, and the years-long development of this video, which led me down at least 3 rabbit holes. But before I do that, let me tell you about today's sponsor. Me. I'm sponsoring this video. You think someone would sponsor a channel with 230 subscribers and only 200 views a month? I don't think so. I spent my own gosh dang money on this video. Or more precisely, my partner's money. That I'm keeping track of to pay them back when I get a significant income. Anyways, if you like this succulent, delectable content, then you can tithe to my Patreon for as little as $1 a month. That way you can get to see my videos early, and you'll get your name at the end of the video. And then, of course, praise the almighty algorithm for a good growth year. This will also help me avoid actual sponsors in the future, because let's be honest, most of them are scams, and they're preying off of your parasocial relationship with the creator for a subpar product, unlike me, who's only preying on your devotion to the fellowship. That's right, I'm going full cult this year. Just you wait until my next video. We're going to have uniforms. Anyways, now back to Buck Rogers. Some of my older viewers will be like, hey, I've heard of him, and the rest of you will have no idea what I'm going on about. Originating from a novella titled Armageddon 2419 AD by Philip Francis Nolan, Buck was originally known as Anthony Rogers. This novella was released all the way back in August 1928 in the pulp magazine Amazing Stories. This guy is so old, he should be in the public domain. Put a pin in that, we'll come back to it. After publication, the head of the National Newspaper Service, John F. Dill, reached out to Nolan to get the story syndicated as a comic strip, with Dick Calkins as the artist, and the comic went into production in January of the next year. While the novella focused more on war tactics and had a lot more violence, the comic strip focused more on adventure and romance. And this is where our dear Buck got super popular. This comic strip spawned comic books, radio plays, TV series, films, and where we're going to be focusing most of our attention, merchandise.
For much of American history, we haven't exactly had the strictest safety laws in place, especially for toys. And that was no different in the 1930s, where we gave kids things like glass-blowing kits that let you melt glass into your mother's table and your own hand, chemistry sets with some handy poison, bomb ingredients, and gunpowder, and my personal favorite, lead toy caster kits. Gilbert, you sly dog, you, I don't think that's right at all.
This is where our Buck comes into play. They made a whole slew of branded caster sets, one of them including the Buck Rogers crew, including Anthony here, Professor Hewer, the inventor and ally, and Depthman of Neptune, who held a ray projector. This was the mold that came with most of the caster sets, with additional things sold separately. So while Buck here is probably the most common, there were several others, including Wilma Dearling, his love interest, and ships and many other enemies too. There are even other instances of Buck doing other stuff. Now that we know where this little guy comes from, where did I find him? Well, back in October of 2022, I was browsing Craigslist for anything miniature related I could find. And as I was scrolling through overpriced Warhammer stuff, I found this guy, and it had just enough information to get me curious. I reached out, and I was able to meet up with a very kind older gentleman who found this guy in amongst his father's possessions after he passed. Now, maybe I overpaid for it, seeing as it's the most common model from this set, but I had never been able to find anything else like that, and he told me the only thing that he knew, which was that it was a Buck Rogers toy. Now, I hadn't really heard of Buck Rogers before this, but as soon as I got home, I started really digging in to try and find out what the heck this thing was. And that's where I found the first of the 3 rabbit holes that I just described to you. I learned that the miniature that I held in my hands, with its imperfections and thick flash lines, was likely made by that gentleman's father as a child. Now mind you, I never actually handled this with my bare hands. I always wore gloves. It is lead after all. But we'll get into the specifics about that in just a minute. Now that I had it, I was just sort of at a loss for what to do with the thing. On the one hand, I could easily just wear gloves, paint it, and then put it in a display case, but that didn't feel like it was enough for this miniature. It now had a story in my head, and I wanted to honor that story. And then I thought about how I wanted to make my own minis through resin pouring at some point. And what better way to learn how to do it than with this miniature? I could keep this mini as pristine as the day it got put in an attic, and make enough to give to friends. Plus, it's a lot safer to handle resin than it is to handle lead. Although if I'm going to be cutting and sanding it, I should definitely wear a respirator, which isn't a big deal for me. I do that almost every time I do resin 3D printing anyway.
Resin itself has been in use for centuries, but we didn't have epoxy resin until Dr. Pierre Castan and Dr. Sylvain Greenlee discovered a curing reaction with phthalic acid anhydride in 1936, and we didn't really have it commercially until it was synthesized by Paul Schlag in 1943, with its introduction to the world at the Swiss Industry Fair in 1946. The process of casting something and making a resin replica can be broadly broken down into a few simple steps. It can also be broken down into a much more detailed set of steps, which I will describe for you now because this was rabbit hole number 2. Step 1. Find an item that you want to replicate with resin. It can be a prototype toy made of clay, a machined part for mass production, or a lead miniature from the 1930s that you want to keep in its original state, but also want to maybe paint and even play war games with. Step 2. Decide if you're going to do what's called a cup mold or a 2-part mold. A cup mold is, you guessed it, done in a cup, and allows for a relatively seamless cast with little flash cleanup. However, sometimes the part is too complicated, or you aren't quite sure how you would cast the item in a cup, and in that case, you can make yourself a 2-part mold. It's a bit more complex and time-consuming, with a bit of extra flash to clean off after, but still gets the job done on complex models. Step 3. Go to a specialty store to buy yourself some resin and rubber for mold making. Speak to the kind gentleman at the counter about the potential hazards of casting a lead figure, which gets them very confused. So you explain your situation, and they recommend you a specific rubber and resin, but they tell you to report to them if it doesn't work because none of them have experience directly casting with lead. So it's new to them too. Spend a bit too much on resin and rubber, but thank them for their time and assistance, and head home to get started. Step 4. Prepare the model for the first half of the mold by placing it firmly in clay or Sculpey, and attempt to make it so that the two eventual halves of the mini will split apart easily with little resistance. Make sure you do this in a foam core box, or if you're cool like me, a Lego one, that is high enough to make one half of the mold. Also, be sure to add some registration marks in the clay to allow both halves to line up effectively. Step 5. Mix a batch of silicone rubber according to the instructions, and carefully pour it over the clay portion of the mold half, being careful not to let it hit the object itself. Try to keep it in a long, thin line so as to avoid adding any more air to the silicone mixture. Once it's completely covering the object and is a bit thick, stop pouring and wait for a few hours to cure. Step 6. Once it's set, flip it. Remove the clay carefully and try to keep the object in place. Then, use some form of non-stick agent like baby powder or Pam cooking spray and pour the newly mixed batch of rubber in the same way as the previous batch. Then, let this one set too. Step 7. Take the object out and make a little cradle for the mold out of wood if you're fancy, or out of cardboard if you're strapped for cash like me. You can use some rubber bands to hold it together when you're ready to pour resin. Speaking of which, Step 8. Carve a pour spout and an air escape into your mold, which you forgot to do at first because you're an idiot. But don't worry, it's not irredeemable, just a bit annoying. Step 9. Mix up a batch of resin that roughly equals the displaced amount of water from putting the object in a cup full of water, or just eyeball the right amounts. Then pour yourself a resin mini and be sure to let it set. Step 10. Repeat Step 9, refining the mold if there are errors until you have enough little guys to be satisfied with yourself. Congratulations! You have now become a master caster and can make a living off of replicating things illegally. Don't do this! Only I can do this! Speaking of which...
Remember when I said put a pin in it? Put a pin in that. We'll come back to it. Well, we are about to pull that pin back out. It is incredibly hard for me to figure out the exact copyright of this little guy, and whether or not I have any right to not only sell, but even replicate it in the first place. I'm not worried about doing it for personal use for this video, but what I'm very concerned with is whether or not I can send these to my friends, who want to do stuff with them for their own projects. So I did the worst of the 3 rabbit holes. Copyright law. As we all know, recently, Steamboat Willie came into the public domain, and we got some great memes in the process. Steamboat Willie came out in 1928, and if you'll remember, so too did Armageddon 2419 AD. However, seeing that this lead figure is a depiction of Buck Rogers from the comic strip, you may believe that the copyright for this guy is expiring next year. However, this specific toy came out in 1934, pushing it back even further. And yet, the copyright protection on the original novella was never renewed, and technically went into the public domain in 1956. And you may think that that would affect the copyright of this little guy. And it just might, but there's a little bit of a problem. This is a product of the original toy, not the toy itself. This is the same as if I drew fan art of SpongeBob in Photoshop. I don't own the property of SpongeBob or Photoshop, but the final piece, I have some copyright claim to it. Or rather, the parts that I contributed to it myself. Does that mean that the dead father of the man I bought this from holds the copyright? Or does he just own the flaws in the original casting? It's either all that, or I'm way off the mark, which is quite likely because I'm not a lawyer, as you can tell. But there's a possibility that the copyright over all of this was waived back in 1956. Now, as I said, I'm definitely not a lawyer, but I think I'm completely in the clear in replicating this for personal use. But I learned a lot while digging through all that information, such as the fact that copyright law is a nightmare, and nobody knows that better than veteran Hollywood producer Don Murphy. That's right, I lied. There is yet another entirely different pseudo-rabbit hole that's tangential to the previous one. Although it could still be argued that this rabbit hole is deep within the previous rabbit hole. Sort of a rabbit network.
In 2015, Murphy announced a film based on Armageddon 2914 AD alongside Legendary Entertainment. When the Dill Family Trust heard of this, they allegedly sent threatening cease and desist letters, claiming ownership over the Buck Rogers character. According to them, it was not Philip Francis Nolan who owned the copyright for the Buck Rogers character, but instead John F. Dill, as Nolan had allegedly worked under contract for John or one of his companies. These circumstances led to the dispute between Nolan and Dill for the ownership of Buck. And in 1942, the rights were allegedly released and assigned to Dill. I could not personally find records of this, but remember, I am not a lawyer, so please take all of this with a laser-grade grain of salt. The copyright for Buck was then passed down through the Dill family line until August 16, 1979, when the Dill Family Trust was created. It is alleged that on the same date, the rights to Buck Rogers were transferred to the Dill Family Trust. Thus, it should not be in the public domain. This is what led the Dill Family Trust reaching out and demanding, allegedly, either compensation for the use of their copyright, or for Murphy and crew to stop working on this movie. They, of course, could not come to an agreement because, on Murphy's side, they believed it was in the public domain. So why would they have to pay for the use of it? Because they couldn't figure it out, Murphy and crew sued the Dill Family Trust. There was a lot of back and forth that I don't honestly understand too well. Having the case moved from California to Pennsylvania, it got thrown out of court 3 times before being heard. And then, after all of this, the Dill Family Trust attempted to claim bankruptcy. This, of course, pissed off Murphy and crew, who then demanded the judge to put a stop to that because the Dill Family Trust were attempting to use Buck Rogers' copyright as a way to pay off debt, thus solidifying the fact that they owned it legally. But the Dill Family Trust wasn't a business trust, which in legalese basically means they weren't even allowed to claim that type of bankruptcy, and the judge halted it. And that's where the trail runs cold on the movie front, being dismissed in 2019. That is until 2020, when Legendary Entertainment announced a TV show, including George Clooney and, wouldn't you know it, our pal Don Murphy as the producer. Hey bud, welcome back. And guess who comes knocking to tell them to stop this time? That's right, it's our friends at the Nolan Family Trust. What? Where were they when the last lawsuit was going on? But wouldn't you know it, Legendary Entertainment shut down the Nolan family in a public statement.
We have secured the rights we need to proceed with our project, and the company will not comment any further on these baseless claims. This same party has been claiming for years that they have rights which they do not have, and have been trying to inhibit projects based on rights they do not legally control.
Well, that puts it pretty bluntly. I would personally have to agree with that based on what evidence I could find. But I could not find out if the Nolan Family Trust is also the Dill Family Trust or not. And regardless, in the year of our algorithm 2024, the original Buck Rogers from the novella should be in the public domain regardless.
So that rabbit hole was almost entirely pointless. But it's still something I had to sift through for this video to figure out if I could resin cast this miniature or not. Which, as far as I can tell, I can, except I can't do it for public sale until 1930, so I guess in 6 years prepare for some Buck Rogers merch. Now what are we left with? A hunk of lead and some hunks of resin that I've spent way too much time and money on. But quite honestly, this saga has really solidified the importance of this little figure in my brain. I want to make something worthwhile with the story I've got here. Now, to spare you a fifth rabbit hole, I won't be going into the actual book or comics because they're a little, So instead, I'm going to take this public domain character and change it for my own purposes, and make a diorama. Let me tell you a little story about the new Buck Rogers.
Hey, who's that?
Oh, Buck? Yeah, he's new around here. They got him going on all these missions for him because of his knowledge of how these old ruins used to work.
So, what's his deal?
What do you mean, what's his deal?
Like, his story. Why is he here?
I'm not one to really tell someone else's story, but his is so out there I ought to give it a swing.
It's that wild?
According to him, at least. Let's see. His real name's Anthony Rogers, and he apparently was born in 1963.
There ain't no way that guy's over 100.
I know. Impossible, right? But it's what he says. Anyways, the guy apparently always had a thing for planes. Wanted to be a pilot, he says. But his eyesight was bad. Like, bad enough not to be able to see his own hand in front of his face, so he went to work for a military contractor instead, the ones making the planes.
But he doesn't wear glasses.
I'm getting to that. Anyways, so he's making the planes, but he hates it. He hates it. The stuff he makes gets used to kill people. So he jumps at an opportunity elsewhere in the company, supposedly to work on some secret development type stuff. Real hush-hush.
What kind of secret stuff is he working on?
Well, he gets the job, and what do you know? They're working on clones, and mind transfers and cryo... whatever, you know, where they freeze people and thaw them out later. So he gets to work there, and he's loving it. And he gets this idea that he could clone himself, yeah? And make a better version of himself that can see better. So he can actually be a pilot. So they're doing all these trials, and he volunteers himself to be one of the test subjects.
That sounds like a bad idea to me.
I'd be inclined to agree with you there, but not so for Buck. He's nothing but excited to build a better self, so to speak. So the day comes where they're gonna strap him into this new mind downloader thing, and he's all nervous, right? So he gets strapped in, puts this head thing on, and then, in a flash, boom. He's not there no more.
Like, not in the machine?
Exactly. He can't see nothing. He can't really feel his body. He goes flailing, and it feels like his body is stuck in thick air. And there's something on his face. So in a panic, he yanks whatever it is off his face, and in doing so pulls a tube out his throat.
Ugh, gross.
Right. But turns out, right, that was his oxygen tube. And now he's drowning in what feels like jello. So he can tell he's in some sort of vat. And he starts banging on the walls, desperate to get out. Just as he's about to lose consciousness, he gets lucky and whacks some cracks in the vat's glass, and he goes tumbling onto the floor.
So wait, he's a clone?
Apparently. He gets up from the floor, soaked in gross shit, and sees that he's in some dilapidated lab, and that he's seeing without glasses. He heads over to a computer terminal and reads what happened. Apparently this lab was creating clones automatically and failing to release them because the hinge was busted. So he's like clone number 2000 and something that ended up finally being able to break free, and the rest got disposed of because they died in the tube.
That's fucked.
Yeah, it really is. So Anthony, or I guess clone Anthony, gets pissed that they would do something so negligent. He breaks the terminal, shutting down the cloning, but it trips some automatic alarm, and in a panic, he races out of there. But the building's abandoned. Nobody in sight. He races himself what feels like a safe distance away, finds himself a locker room with some leftover clothes, and grabs whatever he can to get himself out of there, including one of those retro blasters.
Yeah, I've seen him carrying that around. I bet that's futuristic to him.
Probably. But he grabs it, makes his way out of there, and somehow we got to him before the Empire did.
Good thing. Who knows what experiments they'd run on him when they found out who he was.
And he's been a good asset to the team here too. Has a lot of knowledge of old tech that we really need. I don't know if I believe the whole clone thing, but damn if it don't make a good story.
So, dear fellowship, what do you think? I think this story holds a lot of the spirit of the mini in a way, and the fact that the original that I picked up is a clone of the first toy really fits in with a lot of the theme, I think. And of course, I had to throw in references to Soma and Star Wars because I like them. I'm incredibly proud of the video that I put together here, and I wanted to thank everybody personally that essentially made it happen. I want to thank my partner, who is fantastic and let me spend a whole bunch of time and resources on what is essentially a frivolous project. I also want to thank Social Samurai, or Sammy, for voicing the representative from the movie company. I also wanted to thank both Sydney and Zyla, I believe. I'm sorry if I'm saying that name wrong. I've only ever had it read. I never heard it spoken out loud, so please forgive me and correct me in the comments. I want to thank both of you for playing the rebels in the audio portion of this video. Definitely go and check them both out on their social medias. They'll be linked in the description. And I also want to thank Alex for being a $10 patron. It's insane that you're doing that, and I appreciate you more than you could know. You're a fantastic game designer and a more fantastic friend. I also want to thank the immense amount of internet forums that allowed me to gather this information. If you all hadn't posted years and years ago, back in the early 2000s, about this, I would never have been able to accumulate all of this knowledge about a very niche subject. So thank you. And finally, I want to thank you, the viewer. You know the PBS thing. This wouldn't be possible without viewers like you. Same thing. And I only really make videos because people appreciate watching them. I really enjoy the feedback and the enjoyment of other people for the works that I make. So no matter how small my audience is, I always get a thrill out of seeing people react positively to my work. So thank you. And as always, may the algorithm bless you and keep you. In the name of the like, subscribe, and holy bell. Amen. Whatever. Just kind of background noise. I wrote this as if I was going to be in the confidence of a space where nobody was listening, but now I know that basically everybody can hear me.
Yes.
So that makes it very awkward to read the lines that I wrote for my own script.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's my own doing. You have to contend with the potential that I could get chat on by verbs.
But that's always true when you're outside.
Yeah. What is that?
It's a big bumblebee.